In this video, we'll be looking at non-communicable diseases. So in this chapter, we will see quite a few things that you might have come across in conversations with other people. So there are some bits there that are like very much common sense based. However, here we'll be focusing on certain terminologies that you will need to include in your exams. So it's very much focusing on those particular key concepts and keywords. So namely, there are two bigger concepts here. First of all is let's look at what causation and correlation is, and then we're going to look at what risk factors are and looking at examples of risk factors and the non-communicable diseases that are correlated or caused potentially by exposure to these risk factors. So first of all, let's look at causation and correlation. Causation, as the name actually implies, it's about something causing another event to happen. So for example, we could say that A, it's just whatever it might be, can cause C to happen. So we say that the relationship between A and C is the causation relationship. A actually causes C to happen. So for example, if you smoke, then you are going to get yellow teeth, right? Or perhaps that we can say that if you smoke, you can get potentially lung cancer. That is a causation sort of relationship. So in the case of correlation, it is slightly different. So let's say, for example, A can cause two events to happen. So we can say it causes B to happen and also causes C to happen. So for example, smoking can cause yellow teeth, but it can also cause lung cancer. But the thing is, having yellow teeth does not cause lung cancer, and having lung cancer doesn't mean that you're going to have yellow teeth. It's two completely different things. So we say that these two events are correlated to each other. They may be both caused by the same thing, but they do not cause each other to occur. So causation is when a particular event or a particular object causes another event to happen, but correlation is saying that there is some sort of link between these two events, however they do not cause each other to happen. In terms of exam questions, they may not lay this out directly as a question, but you need to be aware of if something is causing another thing to happen or if they're just simply correlated. There's a link there, there's a relationship there, but may not necessarily be causation. So on that note, let's look at some risk factors. You are going to come across lots of different examples of those diseases, which can be caused by either one of these risk factors or even a combination of all of them. So we're going to explore and look at what they are and have a very quick overview in terms of what are some of the diseases that they can cause. So first of all, let's look at some risk factors that are related to a person's lifestyle. So high sugar diet, high fat or cholesterol diet, and little to no exercise being done by an individual person. Now, all of these could lead to obesity, someone being extremely overweight. Obesity is an interesting one because it's a consequence of having certain risk factors, in this case, these three particular lifestyle-related ones. However, obesity itself can also be considered as a risk factor in certain situations. So someone who's naturally overweight or obese, that would also become a risk factor. No matter what the reason or the causes of the obesity is, that condition of being overweight itself becomes a risk factor. A lot of times, though, obesity is linked to these three particular risk factors. So we're now going to look at those two particular types of non-communicable diseases that they could cause. So first, considering high sugar diet and little to no exercise, they are both risk factors for type 2 diabetes. Now, you will learn more about diabetes in the homeostasis and hormonal control chapter later on. But the idea of diabetes is a situation where someone cannot control their blood sugar levels or blood glucose level very well. Now, there are two types. Type 1 would be hereditary, it's genetic, and it's when a person's pancreas cannot produce enough insulin to help the absorption of glucose from the bloodstream into the cells. In the case of type 2 diabetes, however, that is developed later on, and that's because of, you're having a high sugar diet or little to no exercise, which means that you have pushed the standards or the standard level of glucose in your bloodstream to be higher than normal. So therefore, the body cells become desensitized towards those insulin. So they do not respond to the normal levels of insulin. So therefore, the glucose stays in your bloodstream and remains keeping a high sugar level. So these people experience periods of time when their blood sugar level is too high or even perhaps too low. They would have sugar crash, and that could lead to a whole bunch of issues there. So as mentioned earlier, obesity itself can also be considered as a risk factor. So people who are naturally obese could also potentially develop type 2 diabetes, although it's the main ones to focus on would be the high sugar diet and little to no exercise. Now, on the other hand, we've got high fat or high cholesterol diet. And together with obesity, they are both risk factors for cardiovascular diseases. So the word cardiovascular can be split into two parts. You've got cardio, which refers to anything to do with the heart. Vascular refers to the blood vessels. So this is a general term given to any diseases that affects the heart or the blood vessels. Two common examples that gets mentioned a lot would be stroke, which is when you get a blood clot in the brain, which means that certain brain cells are not receiving the oxygen and glucose and they start to malfunction. Another typical one that actually links to something you've learned previously is coronary heart disease. So this is a situation where the coronary heart vessels are being blocked, so therefore the heart muscles are not getting the oxygen and glucose that they need, meaning they will not be able to do enough respiration, they do not have enough energy, the heart muscles can contract less, and that could cause a whole lot of problems, which ultimately can lead to a heart attack. So that is one of the examples that come up a lot, and that links to the chapter about the heart structure, and you will need to know about the treatments for coronary heart disease, including the stent and statins. So those are three particular risk factors that come up a lot. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the times the questions will ask, name 2 risk factors for particular diseases that I've mentioned here, or perhaps they would say suggest 2 treatment for these diseases. With little to no exercise, that's quite easy. Usually it's just to say risk factor would be they don't do enough exercise, or the treatment would be they need to do more regular exercise. However, for the other 2, which is about diet, please do not say things like that person has an unhealthy diet or unbalanced diet, or perhaps if it's asking for treatment and people say they should be having a healthy diet or a balanced diet, those answers will not be accepted. Because it depends on what do you mean by balance, like what do you mean by healthy, because there are loads of other things in our diet that which doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking a lot of sugar or fat, but you are lacking in other sort of vitamins or other intakes of nutrients, which means that it's still an unbalanced diet, but it will not lead to these diseases. So if it's specifically about these ones, you have to mention exactly what kind of diet that person should take. So for example, you should say low sugar diet or low carbohydrate diet, or a controlled intake of carbohydrates, or you can say a low fat diet or low cholesterol level diet. So it has to be as specific as you can. So that's one major pitfall when it comes to questions about these 3 risk factors. So on the other hand, we're going to look at some other risk factors now. Another major one is about smoking. So this is generally referring to tobacco smoking and not talk about any of the other ones. Now for smoking, you need to know a few things. First of all, are the 3 components, chemical components that are found in tobacco smoke and their effects on the body. So first of all, we've got a really famous one, which is nicotine. It is an addictive substance. So that means that it causes your brain to release more chemicals that makes you want to keep smoking. So it makes it really hard to actually quit smoking because of the content of nicotine. However, apart from being addictive, there's another aspect of nicotine that gets ignored a lot, is that nicotine can actually increase a person's heart rate and blood pressure. It's also another risk factor or that could cause cardiovascular diseases. So a higher heart rate or blood pressure means that you're going to have a higher chance of blood clots being formed or bursting of the blood vessels, which ultimately leads to stroke or heart attacks. And so nicotine can actually have that particular impact as well. Apart from nicotine, another really famous one would be the presence of carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide has the chemical formula CO. It's colorless, it's odorless, you can't see it, you can't smell it, it doesn't taste of anything either, but it's extremely dangerous. Carbon monoxide has an extremely high affinity to hemoglobin. The word affinity means attraction. So essentially, if there is a lot of oxygen in the environment and there's one hemoglobin and there's one carbon monoxide, that carbon monoxide will bind to that despite the presence of other oxygen molecules. So once it binds, it's pretty much permanent. Essentially, if that hemoglobin is attached to carbon monoxide, it is not going to be able to bind to any further oxygen. So over time, that's going to decrease the oxygen levels in the bloodstream. That means your organs are receiving less oxygen, and obviously less respiration can occur, less energy is released, and a lot of the chemical reactions cannot occur. The third and final component that you need to know is tar. So tar is a black sticky substance that that basically lines your airways, and in your trachea and bronchus you will have mucus and cilia. So mucus is a sticky substance that traps pathogens, and then it gets removed by the cilia. So the cilia is very important. But the presence of tar, because it's a very heavy sticky substance and it's very difficult to remove it. In fact, it is so heavy that it can damage the cilia, and it crushes the cilia, which means you have a continuous production of mucus to trap the pathogens. However, the cilia is damaged, so therefore it cannot remove the mucus, hence the pathogens as well. So therefore the pathogens stay in your airways, and that could cause lots of issues. With the trapped pathogens in the trachea and the bronchus, you can cause all sorts of infections there. So for example, bronchitis is a typical one, or sometimes we got something called emphysema, which is where the alveoli basically burst because of continuous infections. But ultimately, the concept is that your respiratory system or your lungs are infected. In the extreme case, we got something called COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder or disease. So it's the idea of when literally every single organ in your respiratory system is infected, and breathing becomes extremely hard and gas exchange becomes extremely difficult. Now, tar, on top of that, is actually also a carcinogen. So carcinogen is the word given to any chemical that can cause cancer. So in the case of tar in smoking, it will cause lung cancer. So we're going to be looking at a few other carcinogens, and the next really famous one is alcohol. It can cause a lot of inflammation to start off with, and over time it will change the cell structure, or the DNA actually, and it will cause a variety of different cancers. So apart from being a carcinogen, it could mainly damage two major organs. First of all is the brain. The alcohol actually can shrink the brain tissue, so it literally shrinks the entire brain and kills the cells there. So that's why people would have slurred speech, or have memory loss, or unable to control their emotions perhaps sometimes. It's because parts of the brains are actually damaged. Another major one is the liver. The liver actually has about 300 different types of functions for the human body, so it's extremely important. But one of the major ones is that it does something called detoxification. It removes and processes all of the toxins that we take into our system, and alcohol is one of them. So if you drink too much alcohol, the liver cells are dying faster because they're processing it, and they will be killed in the process. And they're dying faster than you could repair it. And over time, it could lead to something called cirrhosis, which is the hardening of the liver, and the liver gets replaced by scar tissues, and eventually that could lead to liver cancer as well. So that actually all links back to the concept of alcohol being a carcinogen. Another major issue is if a pregnant woman is drinking alcohol, then the baby will have something called fetal alcohol syndrome. The fetal brain, or a child's brain, is very susceptible to the effects of alcohol. So if a woman drinks during pregnancy, the alcohol will actually affect the development of the fetus and the baby. That is, then the effects would be either, in the worst case scenario, it will lead to miscarriage or stillbirths, which means that the baby is born dead. And if the baby did survive, they would have the brain is significantly smaller because they are not developed due to the effects of the alcohol in the uterus. So they will have all of the issues that you would see in an alcoholic. So they might be, they would have difficulty in learning and memory. Emotional control might be not that good. They might even have some facial deformities as well because of how the alcohol affects the cell's development in the physical body. So that is why pregnant women it should not drink. It's not recommended to drink because of the dangers of fetal alcohol syndrome. Another carcinogen that you need to know briefly about is ionizing radiation. Because of the ionizing power of it, and you will learn more about this in physics, it's able to actually damage bits of the DNA, and there is no guarantee that the DNA will be able to repair itself correctly. So therefore, overexposure to ionizing radiation could cause DNA mutation in your genes, and again, that is considered as a carcinogen because mutations can potentially lead to cancer as well. So on that note, you need to know a little bit more about cancer. Now, cancer, a lot of people tend to think about tumors, and tumors are actually the idea of a ball of cells that are made because of uncontrollable growth. But the thing is, we can have two types of tumors. So one type is called a benign tumor. So benign tumors are usually safer in the sense that they do not cause cancer. The cells that are found in a benign tumor are usually quite round and smooth, like a regular normal cell that you find in the body. It's just that it's got excess growth, so it's just growing a lot faster than the others. So unless it's actually pressing on certain nerves, or if it's increasing pressure in certain very delicate organs like the brain, generally speaking, benign tumors are safe and you don't necessarily need to do anything about it unless, as mentioned, it's in a very dangerous location. The danger is if the tumor is actually malignant. So malignant tumor cells usually are irregular shape. They're not contained within a membrane, so that means if it's not contained within the ball of cells in the tumor, it's able to leave. And first of all, that malignant tumor itself is considered as cancer. But the thing is, because it's not contained, as I mentioned, they are able to leave and travel through the bloodstream. So I meant that the malignant cells can break out from their original tumor and travel through the bloodstream. And if they reach to any other organs, they are able to latch onto that organ and form a secondary tumor. That is what we mean, that's what we call metastasis, is in stage 3 or 4 cancer. That's when the malignant cells are doing this particular process. And if they are able to form a secondary tumor, that's what we call that the cancer has spread to other organs. So let's say a typical exam question would be someone who has lung cancer is also found to have liver cancer. Explain why. And in that sense, it's not about the risk factors that they might be exposed to. Is simply about how the malignant tumor cells found in the lungs have traveled through the bloodstream and reached to the liver, forming a secondary tumor, which is what the liver cancer is. So that's a typical 3-marker question. So make sure you mention the fact that it could break out from the original cell, from the original tumor, travel through the bloodstream, and then forming a secondary tumor there. But the thing is, even if someone has cancer, you just need to be aware of as well in terms of the treatment. So you could potentially treat cancer with 2 particular methods. You can do something called chemotherapy, which is the injection of chemicals or drugs that could kill the tumor cells. Obviously, the thing is, it works really well, but the bad thing is it might kill your healthy cells as well. So people who are undergoing chemotherapy might experience hair loss because the hair follicle cells are being killed, and they might have a weaker immune system because the white blood cells are being killed as well. So that's the downside to it. The good news is, some of you may have learned this in the previous chapter about monoclonal antibodies. We now can have something called targeted therapy, where the chemo drug is being carried by an antibody that can target and bind to malignant cells only and avoids all of the other healthy cells. So there are relatively recent developments in this field, so that could lessen the effects of chemotherapy. On the other hand, you can have radiotherapy, which is using radiation to target the malignant tumor and try to kill the cells in that way. Now, some of you might think, okay, but ionizing radiation is a carcinogen, so why are we using radiation to treat cancer when it can cause cancer? So there are many different types of radiation, which you would learn in physics. Some of them are ionizing, some of them are not. But the idea is about going back to the concept of correlation and causation. It's about the level of exposure and the types of radiation that you're using and the dosage of it. So, and in this case, in the radiotherapy, because you are targeting beams of radiation to one specific point around the tumor and you're not affecting anything else, you are almost in some sense mutating the malignant cells themselves to try to cause them to self-destroy. So that would work in that way. And the benefit is it's targeted, so it's not going to necessarily cause hair loss, but it might cause a burn mark on the surface of the skin where the radiation goes through. But generally speaking, again, it's quite a well-practiced method now. So radiotherapy has its own benefits as well. So this is the overview of non-communicable diseases. So keep in mind, make sure you know the different risk factors and making sure you know what the effects of those risk factors would be and then the consequences that they lead to. You will need to know a little bit more about cancer in terms of the different types of tumors and how it could spread and also the two types of treatment there. But generally speaking, in this chapter, it is very much about the use of keywords in your answers, and be prepared to be asked to do some data analysis in the questions if they give you graphs or tables in that sense, and it's about using those particular techniques and keywords to get as many marks as you can.